A man who never showed fear finally broke the night another man made her laugh. 14 months of silence shattered when Damian Calloway, Chicago's most dangerous crime lord, watched his bodyguard smile at someone else. What began as professional distance became obsession. What felt like control was actually terror. And when bullets tore through downtown streets during a rainstorm ambush, the only name on his lips wasn't business. It was hers. This is the story of a woman trained to protect and a man who forgot how to feel anything until jealousy reminded him what he stood to lose. Like this story and comment your city so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. Rain hammered the glass walls of Damian Calloway's penthouse like bullets nobody fired yet. 40 floors above Chicago, powerful men in tailored suits whispered over crystal tumblers filled with whiskey worth more than most people earned in a year. Cigar smoke curled toward recessed lighting while leather chairs creaked under the weight of egos. Nobody dared challenge directly. Claire Whitmore stood near the entrance wearing black tactical clothing that fit her frame like a second skin. Former military intelligence. 3 tours overseas before private sector money pulled her into something darker and infinitely more complicated. Sharp green eyes swept the room in mechanical intervals. Exits mapped, threat assessment running, breathing controlled. 14 months. That's how long she had protected Damian Calloway without ever once believing he saw her as anything beyond a useful weapon. Damian sat at the head of a marble table that cost more than a luxury sedan, his posture relaxed in a way that somehow communicated absolute authority. Black dress shirt rolled to his forearms, tattoos climbing above his collar in patterns Claire had memorized without meaning to. Dark hair swept back, jaw tight, eyes cold and calculating behind gold-rimmed glasses he only wore during business meetings. He never raised his voice, never repeated himself, trusted almost nobody. And he had never, not once in 14 months, looked at Claire Whitmore like she was a woman instead of a soldier. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself professionalism meant emotional distance. She told herself a lot of lies that worked until they didn't. Across the room, Viktor Sokolov leaned back in his chair and gestured broadly with hands scarred from decades of violence nobody discussed in polite company. Russian accent thick as the smoke filling the space. You ask for patience, Damian, but patience requires trust, and trust requires proof. Damian sipped his whiskey without breaking eye contact. You'll have your proof when the shipment clears customs, not before. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps you forget who you negotiate with. I forget nothing. Damian's voice dropped lower, colder, the kind of quiet that made grown men reconsider their life choices. Which is why I remember the last man who questioned my word ended up regretting his doubt. The room went silent except for rain against glass and the faint hum of city noise 40 floors below. Claire shifted her weight imperceptibly. Her hand stayed loose near her concealed sidearm. Not threatening, just ready. Always ready. Victor stared at Damian for 5 long seconds before finally nodding once. Then we wait. The tension broke like a rubber band snapping. Conversations resumed, deals continued. Money changed hands through coded language and handshakes worth millions. Claire exhaled slowly and let her hand fall away from her weapon. Another night. Another negotiation. Another room full of dangerous men who believed power meant never showing weakness. She had stopped counting how many times she watched Damian navigate these moments with perfect control. How he never flinched, never hesitated, never let anyone see past the armor he wore like a second skeleton. The meeting ended an hour later. Men filed out through the private elevator while bodyguards flanked them like silent shadows. Claire stayed near the door, scanning faces, memorizing details nobody else would notice or care about. When the last guest disappeared into the elevator, Damian stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Rain streaked down the glass in patterns that looked almost artistic under city lights. Problems? Claire asked. Not yet. Damian didn't turn around. But Victor's getting impatient. Victor's always impatient, which means he's getting dangerous. Claire moved closer but kept professional distance between them. Always professional distance. You want extra security on the next shipment? I want to know who's feeding him information about our timeline. Damian finally turned to face her. His eyes looked darker in the low light, tired in a way he never showed anyone else. Someone's talking. I need to know who. I'll run background checks on everyone with access. Do it quietly. I always do. Something flickered across Damien's expression. Acknowledgement, maybe respect, before his usual mask slipped back into place. Get some sleep, Claire. Tomorrow's going to be long. She nodded once and headed toward the elevator. 14 months of this. 14 months of watching him carry an empire on his shoulders without ever asking for help. 14 months of memorizing his habits, his tells, the way his voice changed when pressure built too high. 14 months of wanting something she told herself was impossible. The elevator doors closed and Claire leaned against the metal wall while Chicago disappeared above her in smooth mechanical ascent. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Professional distance. That's what kept people alive in this world. That's what she repeated to herself every single night before falling asleep alone. 2 weeks later, everything changed because of a laugh. Ethan Mercer was young, ambitious, and dangerously charismatic in ways that made older men nervous and younger women interested. Recently promoted into Damien's inner circle after proving himself during a supply chain crisis that could have cost millions. Brown hairstyle just carefully enough to look careless. Easy smile. Confident posture that suggested he had never once doubted himself. Claire didn't trust him yet, but she also couldn't ignore how easily he made her feel normal. They were reviewing security footage in Damien's downtown office, a legitimate business front that looked like any other corporate headquarters from the outside. Inside, however, power ran deeper than quarterly earnings reports. Ethan leaned over Claire's shoulder, squinting at the monitor showing warehouse camera feeds. Wait, go back! She rewound 15 seconds. There, Ethan pointed at the screen. That guy's been circling the same section for 20 minutes. Claire studied the figure carefully. Could be lost. Or could be casing the place for later. You always this paranoid? Ethan grinned. You say paranoid. I say thorough. Claire couldn't help it. She laughed, not loud, not dramatic. Just a genuine sound that escaped before she could stop it. And across the room, Damien's head turned sharply toward the noise. He had been reviewing financial documents at his desk. Silent, focused, completely absorbed in whatever numbers filled the pages in front of him. Until Claire laughed. The sound froze him mid-motion. His pen stopped moving. His eyes lifted from the papers and locked onto the scene playing out 15 feet away. Ethan standing too close to Claire, Claire smiling at something Ethan said, the two of them existing in a moment that excluded everyone else. Something dark and sharp flickered behind Damien's carefully controlled expression. Jealousy. Raw and undeniable and completely out of character for a man who prided himself on never reacting emotionally to anything. Claire felt it before she saw it. The temperature in the room shifted. The air felt heavier. She glanced up and met Damien's stare across the distance separating them. His face revealed nothing, but his eyes told a completely different story. Ethan noticed nothing. He was still talking about surveillance patterns and potential security risks while Claire's pulse kicked up without permission. 14 months. 14 months of silence and professional distance and carefully maintained boundaries. And one laugh shattered all of it. Well, the waterfront gala happened 3 nights later. Charity event. Black tie crowd. Politicians mixing with businessmen, mixing with criminals nobody could prove were criminals. Everyone smiling. Everyone pretending the money came from legitimate sources. Claire wore a floor-length black gown that allowed concealed carry without obvious bulges. Hair pulled into a severe bun. Minimal makeup. She looked elegant and dangerous in equal measure. Exactly how Damien preferred his security to appear at high-profile events. She shadowed him through conversations that meant nothing and deals that meant everything. Watched his back while he shook hands and made promises he might or might not keep. Then Marcus Webb made a mistake. Wealthy real estate developer. Old money. The kind of confidence that came from never once experiencing real consequences. He approached Claire while Damien spoke with a senator across the room. You must be exhausted, Marcus said smoothly. Following him around all night. Claire kept her expression neutral. I'm fine. You're more than fine. Marcus let his gaze travel down her body in a way that made her skin crawl. Damien's lucky to have someone so dedicated. I'm just doing my job. Of course. Marcus touched her arm. Light pressure, familiar, inappropriate. But surely you take breaks. Maybe I could. He didn't finish the sentence because Damien crossed 30 feet of crowded ballroom in approximately 4 seconds. No running, no shouting, just sudden presence like a storm materializing out of clear skies. His hand locked around Marcus's wrist with terrifying calm, the kind of grip that communicated exactly how easily bones could break if pressure increased even slightly. The surrounding conversations died instantly. Marcus's confident smile vanished. Damien, you were just leaving. Damien's voice stayed quiet, almost polite, which somehow made it infinitely more dangerous. Weren't you? Marcus tried to pull his arm free. Damien didn't let go. I didn't mean, yes, you did. Damien leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper only Marcus and Claire could hear. Touch her again, and I'll make sure every real estate deal you have in this city disappears overnight. We clear? Marcus went pale. Crystal. Damien released his wrist. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly knocking into a waiter carrying champagne flutes. He mumbled something that might have been an apology before disappearing into the crowd like a man suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. The party resumed slowly. Conversations picked back up. Laughter returned. But everyone present had just witnessed something nobody would forget. Damien Calloway didn't make scenes, which meant Claire Whitmore mattered in ways that went far beyond professional protection. Damien turned toward her. His jaw was tight. His hands were steady now, but she had felt them shaking when he grabbed Marcus. You okay? He asked quietly. Claire nodded. I can handle myself. I know you can. His eyes searched her face like he was memorizing something he might lose. Doesn't mean I want to watch other men touch you. The confession hung between them like smoke, raw, honest, completely unguarded. Before Claire could respond, Damien's right-hand man Lucas Reed appeared beside them with urgent news whispered low enough that nearby guests wouldn't hear details. Business crisis. Immediate attention required. Damien's mask slipped back into place instantly. We'll finish this later, he told Claire. Then he was gone, disappearing into a private room with Lucas, while Claire stood alone in the middle of a glittering ballroom full of people who didn't matter. Her heart was racing. Her hands felt cold, and for the first time in 14 months, she wondered if Damien's silence had never been indifference. Maybe it had been fear all along. The weeks that followed felt like watching a dam develop cracks. Damien started asking questions he had never asked before. Where had she been during her off hours? Who had she spoken with? Did Ethan Mercer require additional assignments, or should he remain on his current detail? Claire answered honestly because lying would insult them both. But she also started noticing things. How Damien positioned himself near her during meetings. How his attention tracked her movements even when he appeared focused elsewhere. How his voice changed, just slightly, whenever Ethan entered a room where Claire was already present. Jealousy didn't make Damien loud or irrational. It made him focused in ways that should have been terrifying. One Thursday afternoon, Claire found herself alone with Ethan in the downtown office again. Same surveillance footage review. Same professional proximity. Except this time, Ethan leaned against the desk and said something that changed everything. He watches you constantly. You know that, right? Claire kept her eyes on the monitor. He watches everyone, not like he watches you. Ethan's voice stayed casual, but his words carried weight. I've worked for a lot of powerful men. None of them look at their security the way Damien looks at you. You're imagining things. Am I? Ethan crossed his arms. Because from where I'm standing, Damien Calloway, the coldest man in Chicago, looks like he's about 2 seconds away from losing his mind every time another man gets within 10 feet of you. Claire finally turned to face him. Why are you telling me this? Ethan shrugged. Because I like you. And I think you deserve to know the truth before you waste any more time pretending it's all professional. It is professional. Then why did he threaten to destroy Marcus Webb's entire career for touching your arm? Claire had no answer for that. Ethan pushed away from the desk. Look, I'm not trying to cause problems. I'm just saying, maybe the distance isn't about him not caring. Maybe it's about him caring too much to risk screwing it up. He left the office before Claire could respond. She sat alone with surveillance footage playing silently on the monitor, and Ethan's words echoing inside her head like accusations she couldn't deny. Damien cared, not professionally, personally. The realization should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything infinitely more complicated. The summons came Friday night, not through Lucas, not through official channels, just a text message from Damien's private number that Claire had only seen used during emergencies. Come to the penthouse, alone, no explanation, no context, just the address she already knew and an instruction that felt more like a request. Claire changed out of her tactical gear into jeans and a black sweater. Nothing fancy, nothing that suggested she was trying to impress anyone. She told herself this was still business. She told herself boundaries still existed. She told herself a lot of things during the elevator ride 40 floors up to Damien's private residence. The doors opened directly into his penthouse. No hallway, no buffer. Just immediate access to luxury designed for a man who valued privacy above everything else. Damien stood near the windows overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline. Same view she had seen dozens of times. Same rain streaking down glass in patterns that looked accidental, but probably weren't. He didn't turn around when she entered. You wanted to see me? Claire stayed near the elevator, giving herself an exit. Professional instinct that felt increasingly hollow. I need to tell you something. Damien's voice sounded different, quieter, less controlled. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Claire's pulse kicked up. Okay. 14 months ago, you walked into my office for a job interview, military background, impressive references, skill set I needed. He finally turned to face her. I hired you because you were the best candidate. That's what I told myself. And now? Now I think I hired you because the moment you walked through that door, something inside me recognized something inside you. Damien moved closer, but stopped several feet away, respecting distance even now. I told myself it was professional, that I needed someone competent, someone loyal, someone I could trust. You can trust me, I know. His jaw tightened. That's the problem. Because somewhere between assignments and late nights and watching you handle situations that would break most people, I stopped seeing you as just security. Claire's breath caught. I spent 14 months keeping distance between us, Damien continued, convincing myself it was the right thing, that caring about you would compromise your safety, that powerful men don't get to have normal relationships. They don't. No, they don't. He took another step closer. But then Ethan made you laugh, and I realized I had been lying to myself about why I kept you at arm's length. Why did you? Because I was terrified. The confession came out raw, unfiltered, nothing like the controlled man who negotiated with killers without flinching. Terrified that if I let you close enough to matter, something would happen to you. Terrified that wanting you would put a target on your back. Terrified that the moment I admitted I needed you for more than protection, I'd lose you. Claire couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the fact that Damien Calloway, Chicago's most dangerous crime lord, was standing in front of her admitting fear. And watching Marcus touch you at that gala? Damien's hands curled into fists. I wanted to kill him, not threaten, not intimidate. Actually kill him for daring to put his hands on something that wasn't his. I'm not a possession, I know. He closed the remaining distance between them, close enough that Claire could see exhaustion in his eyes, vulnerability he never showed anyone. But you're also not just my bodyguard anymore. You haven't been for a long time. And I can't keep pretending distance protects either of us when all it does is make me lose my mind every time another man looks at you the way I want to look at you. Rain hammered against the windows behind him. The city glowed 40 floors below, and Claire stood frozen between professional obligation and personal desire that had been building for 14 months without permission. If we cross this line, she said carefully, everything changes. I know. I can't protect you effectively if I'm emotionally compromised. Then stop protecting me. The suggestion hit like a physical blow. What? Quit the detail. Damien's voice stayed steady, but his eyes betrayed desperation underneath. Walk away from the job, stay anyway. Claire stared at him. You're asking me to choose. I'm asking you to trust that I can keep myself alive long enough for you to figure out whether this, he gestured between them, is worth risking everything we've built. The silence stretched long enough that Claire could hear her own heartbeat pounding against her ribs. 14 months. 14 months of discipline and boundaries and professional distance that felt increasingly like a cage. She thought about Ethan's words, about the way Damien watched her, about Marcus's wrist trapped in an iron grip, about every small moment that suggested something existed beneath the surface they both pretended didn't matter. "If I quit," Claire said slowly, "and this doesn't work, it will." "You don't know that." "No." Damien reached up and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. His hand was shaking. "But I know spending another 14 months pretending I don't care about you will destroy me faster than any enemy ever could." Claire closed her eyes and made a choice that terrified her more than any battlefield ever had. "Okay. Okay." She opened her eyes and met his gaze directly. "I'll submit my resignation Monday morning." Something broke across Damien's expression. Relief. Hope. Fear. All of it crashing together in a way that made him look human instead of untouchable. "And after that?" he asked quietly. Claire stepped closer until no distance remained between them. "After that, we figure out what happens when the most dangerous man in Chicago stops pretending he doesn't need anyone." Damien's hands came up to frame her face. Gentle, reverent, like he was holding something precious that might shatter if he squeezed too hard. "I need you," he whispered, "more than I've ever needed anything." Then he kissed her. Not soft, not tentative. Like a man who had spent 14 months holding back and finally gave himself permission to stop. Claire kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands fisted in his shirt, her body pressed against his. 14 months of want and denial and careful control burning away like paper in fire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, rain still hammered against the windows, and Chicago still glowed below them, and nothing about the world had changed, except everything had changed. "What happens now?" Claire asked. Damien rested his forehead against hers. "Now we hope I didn't just make the biggest mistake of both our lives." 3 weeks later, gunfire shattered the illusion that resignation meant safety. Claire's resignation became official on a Tuesday morning that felt like every other Tuesday, except it wasn't. She signed the paperwork in Damien's downtown office while Lucas Reed watched with an expression that suggested he knew exactly why she was leaving and didn't approve. Heavy silence filled the room, the kind that made even breathing feel intrusive. "You're making a mistake," Lucas said after she set down the pen. Claire met his stare without flinching. "That's not your call." "No. But when this blows up in both your faces, I'm the one who'll have to clean up the mess." Lucas turned toward Damien, who stood near the windows with his back to both of them. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure." Damien's voice stayed level. Final. The tone he used when arguments were pointless. Lucas shook his head slowly. "You're thinking with the wrong part of your anatomy. Careful." Damien finally turned around. His expression remained neutral, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "You're talking about someone I care about." "Exactly my point." Lucas grabbed the signed resignation papers off the desk. "You care, which means you're compromised, which means people are going to notice weakness where there wasn't any before. Let them notice." Jesus Christ. Lucas threw the papers back down. "You built an empire on the principle that nothing matters more than control. Now you're throwing it away because you can't keep your hands off your bodyguard?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Claire stood slowly. Her muscles tensed instinctively, not because she feared violence, because she recognized the particular brand of silence that preceded it. Damien crossed the space between himself and Lucas in 3 measured steps, not rushing, not threatening, just closing distance with the kind of calm that made smart men nervous. "Say that again," Damien said quietly. Lucas held his ground, but his jaw tightened. "I'm trying to protect you from yourself." "I didn't ask for protection." "No. You asked me to run your organization while you play house with someone who just quit the one job that justified her being in your life 24 hours a day." Lucas's voice rose slightly. "You think your enemies won't see this? You think they won't realize the great Damien Calloway finally found something that matters more than business? Then they'll realize I'm human. Being human gets you killed in our world." Damien stared at Lucas for 5 long seconds before speaking again. "Are we done here?" Lucas looked between Damien and Claire like he was watching a car accident happen in slow motion. Yeah, we're done. He left without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than slamming. Claire exhaled slowly. He's not wrong. He's not right either. Damien moved toward her, close enough that she could see exhaustion in his eyes from too many late nights and not enough sleep. Lucas thinks control means isolation. I used to think the same thing. And now? Now I think isolation just means dying alone. He reached for her hand. His fingers were warm against her palm. I'd rather take the risk. Claire wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that love could exist in a world built on violence and lies and carefully calculated betrayals. But wanting something didn't make it safe. The ambush happened during a routine transfer 3 weeks after Claire's resignation became official. Damien had insisted she stay away from active operations. No more security details. No more putting herself between him and bullets. She had agreed because arguing felt exhausting and because part of her wanted to believe normal was possible. She was wrong. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Claire's phone vibrated against the nightstand in Damien's penthouse, where she had fallen asleep reading financial reports that made her eyes cross. She grabbed it without thinking. Lucas's voice came through rough and urgent. We've got a situation. Claire sat up fast. Her heart rate spiked immediately. What kind of situation? Ambush. Downtown transfer route. 3 vehicles. Heavy weapons. Lucas was breathing hard like he had been running. Damien's alive, but we're pinned. Ice flooded Claire's veins. Where? Warehouse district, near the river. Claire. Lucas's voice cracked slightly. He's asking for you. She was already moving, feet hitting the floor, grabbing clothes from the chair where she had thrown them earlier. I'm coming. No, stay where you are. This is exactly what they want. I don't care what they want. Claire yanked on jeans with one hand while holding the phone with the other. Send me the location. Claire, send it, now. Lucas hesitated for maybe 2 seconds before coordinates appeared via text message. We've got reinforcements en route. Just be careful. Claire ended the call and finished dressing in under 90 seconds. Black tactical pants, dark shirt, boots laced tight. She grabbed the weapon she kept locked in Damien's safe and checked the magazine by muscle memory before heading toward the elevator. The city looked different at 2:30 in the morning. Emptier, darker. Rain had started falling again, turning streetlights into blurred halos that reflected off wet pavement. Claire drove Damien's backup vehicle, a nondescript sedan that moved fast when pushed, through downtown Chicago, while her mind ran through tactical scenarios she had trained for but hoped never to use. Ambush meant planning. Planning meant someone inside the organization had talked. Talked meant trust was compromised at levels that should have been impossible to penetrate. She reached the warehouse district in 14 minutes, pulled over 2 blocks away from the coordinates Lucas had sent, killed the engine and sat in sudden silence while rain hammered against the windshield. This was stupid. This was exactly the kind of emotional decision that got people killed. This was also unavoidable because the alternative was sitting safe in a penthouse while Damien died 2 miles away. Claire checked her weapon one more time. Then she got out of the car and moved toward the sound of distant gunfire echoing between empty buildings. The scene looked like something out of a war zone. 3 black SUVs sat at angles across a narrow street between warehouses. Bullet holes punctured metal. Glass littered the pavement. 2 bodies lay motionless near an overturned vehicle. Damien's people had taken defensive positions behind the SUVs, maybe 8 shooters total. Maybe less. Hard to tell in the dark with rain obscuring everything beyond 20 feet. Claire approached from the south side using shadows and abandoned shipping containers for cover. Her training kicked in automatically. Breathing controlled, movements precise, eyes scanning for threats. She spotted Lucas crouched behind the middle vehicle. Blood streaked down the left side of his face from a cut somewhere above his hairline. He was shouting orders to men positioned around him while returning fire toward warehouse windows where muzzle flashes indicated enemy positions. Claire moved closer until she was within speaking distance. Lucas! He spun toward her voice with his weapon raised. Recognized her. Lowered the gun. What the hell are you doing here? Where is he? Inside the lead vehicle. Uninjured, but we can't move without drawing more fire. Lucas wiped rain and blood out of his eyes. They've got us boxed in. Claire studied the tactical situation carefully. 3 warehouses formed a rough U-shape around the street. High ground advantage, multiple firing positions, professional setup. How many shooters? She asked. At least 10, maybe more. Lucas fired 3 rounds toward a window. Someone screamed. They knew our route, knew our timing, knew exactly where to hit us. Inside job. Has to be. Lucas's jaw tightened. Which means we can't trust anyone who isn't standing here right now. Claire's mind raced through possibilities. Inside information, coordinated ambush, resources that suggested organization rather than opportunistic attack. Viktor Sokolov, she said. Lucas glanced at her sharply. What? The Russian. From the meeting 6 weeks ago. He wanted proof of loyalty. Claire gestured toward the ambush site. This is him sending a message. Or testing our defenses. Same thing. Claire moved toward the lead vehicle before Lucas could stop her. She covered the distance in a crouched run. Bullets cracked overhead, but nothing came close. Professional shooters conserving ammunition, waiting for better targets. Claire reached the SUV and yanked open the rear door. Damien sat inside, looking completely calm despite the chaos surrounding him. Suit jacket torn at the shoulder, dirt smudged across his cheek. But his eyes were clear and focused, and the moment he saw Claire, everything else disappeared. You shouldn't be here, he said. Too late. Claire climbed into the vehicle and pulled the door shut behind her. Bullets pinged off armored metal. You okay? I'm fine. He reached for her face with both hands. You need to leave, now. Not happening. Claire, we can argue about this later. She pulled away from his touch and assessed the situation through the window. Right now, we need to get you out of this kill box. Damien stared at her for a moment that stretched too long. Then something shifted in his expression. Not surrender. Recognition. Understanding that Claire wasn't his bodyguard anymore, but she also wasn't someone who walked away when bullets started flying. What's the plan? He asked. Lucas said reinforcements are coming. How long? 5 minutes, maybe less. Then we hold position and let them collapse the perimeter. Claire checked her weapon again. Where's your gun? Damien pulled a pistol from somewhere beneath the seat. You really think I sit in ambushes unarmed? Despite everything, Claire almost smiled. Fair point. More gunfire erupted from the north side. Someone screamed, glass shattered. The sound of running footsteps on wet pavement echoed between buildings. Lucas's voice cut through the noise. They're pushing the left flank. Claire glanced at Damien. Stay here. Like hell. He was already opening his door. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. Before Claire could argue, Damien was out of the vehicle and moving toward Lucas's position with his weapon raised. Claire cursed under her breath and followed because letting him run into gunfire alone felt worse than dying next to him. They reached Lucas 30 seconds before everything went sideways. A massive explosion ripped through the warehouse to the east. Fire bloomed orange and deadly against the night sky. The shockwave hit like a physical force, throwing Claire sideways into Damien's chest. His arms caught her instinctively while debris rained down around them. What the hell was that? Lucas shouted. No one answered because the second explosion answered for them. West warehouse, same size, same force, flames climbing toward low clouds while smoke billowed thick and black. They're burning their positions, Damien said. His voice stayed eerily calm. Which means they're about to run or they're about to charge. Lucas's phone buzzed. He checked it fast. Reinforcements are 2 minutes out. Too long. Claire scanned the burning buildings. Movement in the shadows. Figures retreating. They're pulling back. She was right. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started. Silence rushed in to fill the vacuum, except for crackling flames and rain hitting pavement. The attacking force melted into darkness like they had never existed. Damien's people held their positions, weapons raised, trigger fingers ready, but no targets remained. Check for wounded, Lucas ordered. His voice sounded hoarse. And get eyes on those warehouses. I want to know who the hell we were fighting. Men moved cautiously through the wreckage. 2 of Damien's people were dead. 3 more injured. The ambush had been brutal and efficient and designed to send a message rather than secure a victory. Claire stayed close to Damien while chaos organized itself into something resembling order. Her heart rate slowly returned to normal. Her hands stopped shaking. Professional detachment settled back into place like armor she had forgotten she was wearing. Damien looked at her with an expression that said everything words couldn't. Relief, fear, gratitude, anger, all of it mixing into something raw and honest and completely unguarded. "Don't ever do that again," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Risk yourself for me." Claire met his stare without flinching. "I'm not going to promise that." "Then I'm not going to stop worrying every time you leave the penthouse." "Good." She reached up and wiped blood from a cut above his eyebrow. "Means you care." Damien caught her wrist gently. His fingers were warm despite the cold rain. "I care more than I should." "No such thing." Sirens wailed in the distance. Police or fire department or both. Someone would have reported the explosions. Questions would need answering. Stories would need coordinating. Lucas approached them with his phone in hand. "We need to move. Now. Before official channels start asking things we can't answer." Damien nodded once. Then he turned back to Claire with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Come with me." It wasn't a request. It was something else, something desperate beneath the surface of his usual control. "Okay," Claire said. Claire. They left together while fires burned and rain continued falling, and Chicago's underworld learned that Damien Calloway had finally found something worth protecting more than his empire. The secured safe house sat in a neighborhood that looked ordinary from outside. Single-family homes, quiet streets, nothing suggesting the building contained armed men and sophisticated security systems designed to detect threats before they became problems. Claire followed Damien through the front door into a space filled with tension thick enough to choke on. Men lined the hallways, weapons visible, expressions hard. Everyone looked exhausted and angry and ready for violence that might or might not come. Lucas was already inside coordinating response strategies with senior members of Damien's organization. Maps spread across a dining table, phones buzzing constantly, voices low and urgent. Damien walked past all of it without acknowledgement. He headed straight toward a back bedroom. Claire followed because not following felt impossible. He closed the door behind them and the noise from outside immediately muffled into background static. For 5 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Damien turned around and looked at Claire like he was seeing her for the first time. Not his bodyguard, not his employee, not even his girlfriend or whatever inadequate label described what they had become to each other. Just Claire. He crossed the room in 3 steps. His hands came up to frame her face, and his hands were shaking. Damien Calloway, the coldest man in Chicago. The king of an empire built on violence and calculated control. His hands were shaking. "I wasn't afraid of dying tonight," he said. His voice came out rough. Wrecked. Nothing like the man who negotiated with killers without flinching. "I was afraid I'd never see you again." The confession hit harder than any bullet ever could. Claire grabbed the front of his torn shirt and pulled him closer. "I'm here." "You shouldn't be." Damien's forehead pressed against hers. "You should be somewhere safe. Somewhere far away from this life." "But I'm not." "No, you're not." His breath came faster. "And that terrifies me more than anything Viktor Sokolov could ever do." Claire had seen Damien survive assassination attempts without breaking a sweat, had watched him stare down men who wanted him dead without showing fear, had memorized every version of his control. But this was different. This was complete emotional collapse wrapped in expensive clothing and bloody hands. "What are we doing?" Claire whispered. "Really? I don't know." Damien pulled back just enough to look at her properly. "But I know I can't lose you. Not now. Not ever. You might not have a choice. Then I'll burn the whole city down before I let that happen." The words should have sounded dramatic, performative, like something out of a movie. Instead, they sounded like a promise. Claire kissed him because talking felt insufficient, because words couldn't contain what she felt watching him shake apart in front of her, because 3 weeks ago she had made a choice that terrified her, and tonight proved exactly why that choice mattered. Damien kissed her back with desperate intensity, his hands tangled in her hair, his body pressed against hers like he needed physical proof she was real and present and alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the bedroom felt smaller, and the walls felt thinner, and reality crashed back in with brutal clarity. "We need to figure out who talked," Claire said. Damien nodded slowly. His professional mask started sliding back into place. "Victor's the obvious suspect. Too obvious." Claire moved toward the window and looked out at quiet suburban streets that gave no indication of the violence brewing beneath the surface. If Victor wanted you dead, he would have sent more shooters. This felt like reconnaissance, testing our response times and our loyalty. Claire turned back around. Someone inside your organization fed them information, route, timing, security protocols. That's not Victor. That's someone you trust. Damien's jaw tightened. Then we start eliminating people from the list until only the guilty remain. That could take weeks. Or it could take hours if we apply the right pressure. Claire knew what he meant. Knew the methods Damien used to extract truth from people who lied professionally. Knew she should probably object on moral grounds she no longer entirely believed in. But moral objections felt hollow when someone had just tried to kill the man she loved. "Lucas," she said, "start with him." Damien's eyes sharpened. "You think Lucas betrayed me?" "I think Lucas objected loudly when I resigned. I think he believes you're compromised, and I think compromised bosses make convenient targets when ambition outweighs loyalty. Lucas has been with me for 8 years, which means he knows exactly where all the bodies are buried." Claire moved closer. "I'm not saying he's guilty. I'm saying he's possible." Damien considered this in silence. Rain continued falling outside. Voices murmured beyond the closed door. Time moved forward whether they were ready or not. Finally, he nodded once. "We'll talk to Lucas first." They found him in the kitchen pouring coffee that smelled like burned rubber and broken promises. Lucas looked up when they entered. His expression remained neutral, but his shoulders tensed slightly. "You two okay?" "We need to talk," Damien said. About? About who knew our route tonight." Lucas set down the coffee pot carefully. "You think I leaked information?" "I think someone did." Damien leaned against the counter with deceptive casualness. "And you're the one who coordinates security logistics, along with 4 other people." Lucas's voice stayed level, but anger simmered underneath. "You seriously going to stand there and accuse me of trying to get you killed?" "I'm asking questions." "No. You're letting her poison your judgment." Lucas gestured toward Claire. 3 weeks she's officially off the detail, and already you're turning paranoid." "Careful," Damien warned. "Why? Because I'm calling out the obvious?" Lucas's control started cracking. "You built an empire on trusting your instincts. Now you're trusting someone who quit rather than actually protect you when it mattered." Claire felt ice flood her veins. "That's not what happened, isn't it?" Lucas turned his attention toward her fully. Cold, calculating. Nothing like the professional colleague who had worked beside her for 14 months. "You spent over a year watching his back. Then the moment things got personal, you walked away. Makes me wonder what else you're walking away from." "Enough!" Damien's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You don't talk to her like that." "Or what?" Lucas took a step forward. "You'll fire me? Kill me? I've given you 8 years. I've protected your interests when you were too busy protecting your own ego. And this is how you repay loyalty? By questioning whether I'm the one who betrayed you?" Silence filled the kitchen thick enough to drown in. Damien stared at Lucas with an expression Claire couldn't read. Not anger, not disappointment. Something colder and infinitely more dangerous. "Who else knew the route?" Damien asked quietly. Lucas's jaw worked for a moment before answering. "Marcus Webb's people requested a meeting downtown. We adjusted the route to accommodate their location." "Marcus Webb?" Claire repeated the name slowly. "The real estate developer from the gala?" "Yeah." Lucas crossed his arms. "What about him?" Claire looked at Damien. "The man you threatened for touching me? The man who left that party looking like you'd destroyed his entire world." Understanding flashed across Damien's face. "He set this up." "Not alone." Claire's mind raced through connections. "But maybe with help from someone who had an axe to grind." "Victor," Damien said, "or someone working for Victor." Claire turned back toward Lucas. "Did you verify Marcus's people independently?" Lucas hesitated just long enough to confirm he hadn't. "Jesus Christ." Damien pushed away from the counter. "They fed you false meeting coordinates. You adjusted our route, and they were waiting." "I didn't know you should have known." Damien's control finally cracked. "That's your entire job. Verifying threats, confirming details, making sure I don't drive straight into an ambush because you got lazy." Lucas's face went pale. I've never been lazy a day in my life. Then you got complacent, which is worse. I got distracted. Lucas's voice rose to match Damien's volume. I got distracted watching you throw away everything we built for someone who might not even be here in 6 months. You want to talk about compromise? Look in a mirror. You're not the same person you were 3 weeks ago. You're weaker, more vulnerable. And everyone in this city can see it. The words hung in the air like accusations that couldn't be taken back. Damien stared at Lucas for a long moment. Then he did something Claire had never seen before. He smiled. Not warm, not friendly. The kind of smile that suggested violence was inevitable and possibly welcome. "Get out," Damien said softly. Lucas blinked. "What?" "Get out of this house, out of my organization, out of my life." Damien's voice stayed terrifyingly calm. "You've got 24 hours to disappear before I decide you're a liability worth eliminating permanently." "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything." Damien took a step forward. "You questioned my judgment. You compromised security, and you disrespected someone I care about. Any one of those would be enough. All three together? You're lucky I'm giving you 24 hours instead of 24 seconds. Lucas looked between Damien and Claire like he was watching everything he had built collapse in real time. "This is a mistake. My mistake to make. You'll regret this. Maybe." Damien's expression remained carved from stone. "But at least I'll regret it on my own terms." Lucas stood frozen for another few seconds. Then he grabbed his jacket off the back of a chair and walked out of the kitchen without another word. The front door slammed shut moments later. Silence rushed back in. Claire exhaled slowly. That was necessary. Damien turned toward her. Some of the anger faded from his eyes, but exhaustion replaced it. He was right about one thing. I am different than I was 3 weeks ago. Is that bad? I don't know yet. Damien moved closer and pulled her into his arms. But I know I'd rather be different with you than the same without you. Claire pressed her face against his chest and listened to his heartbeat gradually slow toward normal. Outside, rain continued falling. Men continued planning responses to threats that multiplied faster than solutions. And somewhere in Chicago, Marcus Webb and Victor Sokolov were learning that Damien Calloway protected what mattered more fiercely than he protected his empire, which meant the war was just beginning. Dawn broke over Chicago with the kind of gray light that made everything look washed out and temporary. Claire stood at the safe house window, watching the city wake up, while her mind refused to stop replaying the previous night in brutal detail. Gunfire, explosions, Damien's hands shaking when he touched her face, Lucas's bitter words before he walked out the door. Behind her, Damien sat at the dining table surrounded by maps and phones and men whose loyalty was suddenly questionable. His voice stayed calm while issuing orders, professional, controlled, like the past 6 hours hadn't happened. But Claire saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when certain names came up, the exhaustion he refused to acknowledge. "We need to move against Webb within 48 hours, one of Damien's senior people was saying. Tall guy, scarred knuckles. Name was either Derek or Dominic, Claire couldn't remember. "Before he realizes we know." "Webb's connected to Victor," Damien replied, "which means moving against him means declaring war on the Russians." "We're already at war, they just shot at you." "They shot near me." "There's a difference." Derek or Dominic frowned. "You think last night was a warning?" "I think last night was reconnaissance disguised as an attack." Damien leaned back in his chair. "They wanted to see how we respond, who we trust, where our weaknesses are." "And what did they learn?" "That I'm willing to burn down everything I built to protect what matters." Damien's eyes shifted toward Claire briefly before returning to the man across from him. "Which either makes me dangerous or desperate, maybe both." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. Strategy, contingencies, responses to scenarios that escalated from bad to catastrophic with alarming speed. Claire stopped listening around the 15-minute mark. Her attention had snagged on something else entirely, a detail. Small, probably meaningless. Except it wasn't. Last night, Lucas said Marcus Webb's people had requested a meeting downtown. Past tense. Requested. Like the meeting had already been scheduled before the ambush. But Claire remembered the gala. Remembered Marcus leaving with his tail between his legs after Damien threatened to destroy his real estate empire. Remembered thinking Marcus looked like a man who would hold grudges forever. Why would someone nursing a grudge request a business meeting 3 weeks later? Unless the meeting was never real. Unless someone else had fed Lucas that information knowing he wouldn't verify it independently. Claire's blood ran cold. She turned away from the window and caught Damien's attention with a look that said they needed to talk privately. Now. He excused himself from the table without explanation and followed her into the back bedroom where they'd had their emotional breakdown hours earlier. The moment the door closed, Claire spoke fast. "Lucas didn't set you up." Damien frowned. "We established that Marcus—" "No. Listen." Claire paced the small room. Her mind was racing. Lucas said Webb's people requested the meeting, but why would Webb request anything after you threatened him at the gala? Revenge. Maybe. Or maybe someone told Lucas that Webb's people requested a meeting, someone Lucas trusted enough not to verify. Understanding flickered across Damien's face. "You think someone fed Lucas false information? I think someone inside your organization has been playing both sides." Claire stopped pacing. "And I think they used Lucas as the fall guy because you'd believe he got complacent before you'd believe he actively betrayed you." "Who?" "I don't know yet, but whoever it is has deep access, route information, security protocols, meeting schedules." Claire's hands curled into fists. "And they're smart enough to make Lucas look guilty without actually getting caught themselves." Damien pulled out his phone and started scrolling through contacts. "I need to bring Lucas back in." "He won't come. Not after you threatened to kill him." "Then I'll go to him." Damien was already moving toward the door. Claire grabbed his arm. "That's exactly what they want. You leave the safe house, you're exposed, vulnerable. I'm not letting an innocent man take the fall for someone else's betrayal." "Lucas isn't innocent. He got sloppy. People died because of that." Claire's voice stayed steady but firm. "But you're right that he didn't actively betray you, which means we need to figure out who did before they finish what they started last night." Damien stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "How do we find them?" "We follow the money, check." Mbakwan. 3 hours later, Claire sat in front of Damien's laptop, surrounded by financial records that made her head hurt. Banking transactions, wire transfers, offshore accounts, shell companies layered so deep that tracing ownership required forensic accounting skills she didn't have. But patterns existed if you looked hard enough. Small deposits. Always under $10,000 to avoid federal reporting requirements. Always from different sources. Always landing in accounts connected to people in Damien's organization. Claire cross-referenced names against the list of people who had known about last night's route. 8 names. She eliminated 3 immediately. Wrong timeline, wrong access level, wrong motivation. That left 5 possibilities. Derek or Dominic. Damien's logistics coordinator named Rachel. A financial advisor named Chen. The head of Damien's legitimate business operations named Patricia Crane. And someone Claire didn't recognize from security footage named Joel Martinez. She was staring at account numbers when the bedroom door opened. Damien entered carrying coffee that smelled infinitely better than the burned garbage Lucas had made earlier. "Find anything?" "Maybe." Claire accepted the coffee gratefully. 5 people with access and suspicious deposits over the past 6 months. "Show me." She pulled up the spreadsheet she'd been building. Names, dates, amounts, patterns that suggested someone was getting paid regularly for information they shouldn't be sharing. Damien studied the screen carefully. His expression remained neutral, but Claire saw the moment recognition hit. "Patricia," he said quietly. Claire looked at the name again. Patricia Crane, head of legitimate operations. Trusted enough to have access to everything. Smart enough to hide her tracks. Ambitious enough to want more than middle management offered. "You know her well?" Claire asked. "I've known her for 6 years." Damien's jaw tightened. "She helped build the legitimate side of my business when most people thought going legal was weakness. Which means she knows exactly how your empire is structured, and exactly where the vulnerabilities are." Damien set down his coffee untouched. "She was at the gala, saw what happened with Marcus. Probably realized I was compromised. So she reached out to Victor. Or Victor reached out to her when he started looking for weaknesses to exploit." Damien pulled out his phone. Either way, she's been feeding him information for months. Claire watched him dial a number. What are you doing? Calling her in for a meeting. That's a mistake. Why? Because if she's smart enough to hide her betrayal this long, she's smart enough to run the moment you summon her. Claire stood up. We need proof first. Something she can't deny or explain away. Damien lowered his phone. What kind of proof? The kind that comes from making her think she's won. The plan was risky. Claire would approach Patricia privately, tell her that Damien was spiraling after Lucas's departure, that his judgment was compromised, that the organization needed steady leadership before everything collapsed. The story was close enough to truth that Patricia would believe it, and desperate enough that she might reveal her hand. They set the meeting for a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. Public location, neutral ground. Somewhere Patricia would feel safe enough to talk honestly. Claire arrived 15 minutes early and claimed a corner table with clear sight lines to all exits. She ordered black coffee she didn't drink and waited. Patricia showed up exactly on time, looking like every successful executive who'd ever graced a magazine cover. Tailored suit, perfect hair, confident smile that suggested she owned whatever room she entered. She slid into the seat across from Claire. This is unexpected. We need to talk, Claire said. About? About Damien. Patricia's expression remained pleasantly neutral. What about him? He's losing control. Claire leaned forward slightly. Last night's ambush rattled him worse than I've ever seen, and firing Lucas was a mistake he can't take back. Damien doesn't make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes when they're thinking with emotions instead of logic. Claire paused deliberately. He's compromised, and compromised leaders get people killed. Patricia sipped her coffee slowly. Why are you telling me this? Because you've been with him long enough to know when things are falling apart, and because I need someone who understands the business side if we're going to stabilize the situation. We? The organization can't survive if Damien keeps making decisions based on personal feelings. Claire held Patricia's gaze steadily. Someone needs to step up, someone he trusts, someone positioned to take control if things get worse. For a moment, Patricia's mask slipped. Just slightly. Just enough to reveal calculation happening beneath the surface. That sounds like mutiny, Patricia said carefully. That sounds like survival. Claire glanced around the coffee shop like checking for threats. Look, I love him, but love doesn't mean ignoring reality. And reality is that Damien Calloway is vulnerable right now in ways he's never been before. Patricia set down her coffee. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing we prepare for the possibility that Damien can't lead effectively anymore. That means securing resources, building alternative power structures, making sure the Empire survives even if the Emperor doesn't. That's treason. That's pragmatism. Claire leaned back. But I understand if you're not interested. I'll find someone else who sees the opportunity. She started to stand. Patricia's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Wait. Claire sat back down. Patricia's expression had changed. Less guarded. More hungry. How long have you been planning this? Since I realized Damien would choose me over his empire, Claire injected just enough bitterness into her voice. Which makes me either the luckiest woman alive or the stupidest. Haven't decided which yet. Patricia studied her carefully. And you think I'd be willing to betray someone I've worked with for 6 years? I think you're smart enough to recognize when a ship is sinking. Claire held her gaze. And I think you've already made preparations for exactly this scenario. The silence stretched long enough that Claire wondered if she'd miscalculated. Then Patricia smiled. Not warm. Not friendly. The smile of someone who'd been playing a long game and finally saw the finish line. Viktor Sokolov approached me 8 months ago, Patricia said quietly. He wanted information about Damien's operations, supply chains, financial structures, weaknesses. Claire's heart rate spiked, but her expression remained neutral. And you gave it to him. I gave him enough to keep him interested. Patricia's voice dropped lower. Victor's building an empire that will make Damien's look small, and he promised me a position at the top when he takes over Chicago. Takes over from Damien. Damien's had his run, but he's weak now, distracted. Patricia's eyes glittered with something cold and ambitious. Victor just needed the right opportunity to strike. Last night was supposed to be that opportunity. Except Damien survived. For now. Patricia leaned forward. But the next attack will finish what we started. Victor's bringing in reinforcements from New York, real professionals, not the reconnaissance team from last night. Claire's blood turned to ice. When? 72 hours, maybe less. Patricia smiled wider. And when it's over, Victor will control the city and I'll control the legitimate business operations that keep everything running smoothly. And Damien? Will be a memory. Patricia said it without hesitation, without guilt, like discussing quarterly earnings instead of murder. Nothing personal, just business. Claire wanted to reach across the table and break Patricia's perfectly composed face, wanted to make her hurt the way Damien would hurt when he learned someone he trusted had been planning his death for 8 months. Instead, she smiled back. Then I want in, Claire said. Patricia studied her for a long moment. You'd really betray him? I'd really survive. Claire kept her voice steady. And if Victor's as powerful as you say, being on the winning side seems smarter than dying loyal to someone who's already lost. Patricia nodded slowly. Victor wants to meet you. Confirm you're serious. When? Tonight. I'll send you the location. Patricia stood up. And Claire, if you're lying, Victor will know, and he's not nearly as forgiving as Damien. She left the coffee shop without looking back. Claire sat alone at the corner table while her hands started shaking. She had the confession, had the timeline, had everything they needed to prove Patricia was the traitor, but she also had something infinitely worse, confirmation that a real attack was coming, with professional killers, in less than 72 hours. And Damien was completely unprepared. Claire drove straight back to the safe house, going 20 miles over the speed limit and not caring about traffic laws that suddenly felt trivial. She found Damien in the back bedroom reviewing security footage from last night's ambush. He looked up when she entered, saw her expression, stood immediately. What happened? Claire closed the door and told him everything. Patricia's confession. Victor's plan. The timeline. The reinforcements coming from New York. All of it spilling out in fast, clipped sentences while Damien's expression went from concern to cold to something darker than anything Claire had ever seen. When she finished, silence filled the room like poison gas. 72 hours, Damien finally said. Maybe less. And Patricia's been working with Victor for 8 months. Yes. Damien walked to the window, stared out at nothing. His shoulders were rigid. His hands curled into fists at his sides. I trusted her, he said quietly. 6 years. I trusted her with everything. I know. She helped build the legitimate businesses, made me believe going legal was possible. His voice stayed eerily calm. And the entire time she was selling me out to Viktor Sokolov. Claire moved closer but didn't touch him. What do you want to do? Damien turned around. His eyes looked empty, not angry, not hurt. Just empty. I want to kill her, he said matter-of-factly. I want to kill Patricia and Marcus and everyone who thought I was weak enough to betray. But that won't stop Victor's reinforcements from arriving, won't prevent the attack, won't save the organization from collapsing when professional killers tear through whatever defenses we managed to throw together in 72 hours. He was right. They were outmanned, outgunned, out of time. Patricia had spent 8 months feeding Victor information about every weakness in Damien's empire, every vulnerability, every crack in the foundation. And now Victor was coming to exploit all of it at once. We could run, Claire said. Disappear. Let Victor have Chicago. Damien looked at her like she'd suggested surrender. I don't run. Then we fight. Against professional killers with 8 months of intelligence about how we operate? Damien shook his head. That's not fighting. That's suicide. So what's the alternative? Damien stared at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not acceptance. Not defeat. Something harder and infinitely more dangerous. We give Victor exactly what he wants, Damien said slowly. Which is? Me. Claire's stomach dropped. No. Listen. No. She moved between him and the window, like physically blocking his path would stop the idea from taking root. You're not offering yourself up as bait. Why not? That's what he wants. That's what Patricia promised him. Damien's voice stayed calm, logical, terrifying. If I surrender, Victor has no reason to attack. His reinforcements go home. The organization survives. And you die. Maybe. Definitely. Claire grabbed the front of his shirt. Victor doesn't want you alive. He wants you gone. Offering yourself up just makes his job easier. Then what do you suggest? I suggest we stop thinking like victims and start thinking like the people who survived 14 months of this life before everything got complicated. Damien's hands came up to cover hers. I can't lose you. You won't. Patricia's right. I'm weak now, compromised. Every decision I make is filtered through whether it keeps you safe. His voice cracked slightly. That's not how empires survive. Empires don't matter if you're dead. Neither does anything else. They stared at each other while the weight of impossible choices pressed down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Finally, Claire spoke. We need Lucas. Damien frowned. I fired him. You also threatened to kill him, which means he's probably angry enough to help us destroy the people who actually betrayed you. Claire let go of Damien's shirt. And he knows your organization better than anyone, including Patricia. He won't come back. He will if we tell him the truth. Claire pulled out her phone. Because Lucas wasn't sloppy. He was set up. And the man I worked beside for 14 months won't let that stand. She dialed Lucas's number before Damien could argue. It rang 4 times. Then his voice came through rough and bitter. What? Lucas. It's Claire. Silence. I know you're angry, Claire continued. You have every right to be, but we were wrong. You didn't betray Damien. Patricia did. More silence. Then, prove it. Claire spent 5 minutes laying out everything they'd discovered. The financial records, Patricia's confession, Victor's plan. All of it. When she finished, Lucas exhaled slowly. That bitch. Yeah, and she's been feeding Victor information for 8 months. Yes, which means last night was my fault for being stupid enough to trust her. No, last night was her fault for being good enough at lying that nobody caught it. Claire glanced at Damien. But the next attack will kill everyone if we don't stop it, and we can't stop it without you. Another long pause. Then Lucas said something that changed everything. I'm not coming back to save Damien. I'm coming back to destroy the people who made me look incompetent. Fair enough. Where do you need me? Claire gave him the safe house address. Lucas showed up 40 minutes later looking like he hadn't slept. Bruises shadowed his eyes. The cut above his hairline had been cleaned but not bandaged. His expression remained carefully neutral when he entered the safe house and found Damien waiting in the dining room. You look like hell, Damien said. You look worse. Lucas dropped into a chair without invitation. Now tell me how we're going to kill Patricia Crane without starting a war we can't win. And for the first time in 12 hours, Claire thought maybe survival was possible after all. The plan came together over 4 hours of brutal strategy that involved more coffee than sleep and more anger than... The plan came together over 4 hours of brutal strategy that involved more coffee than sleep and more anger than caution. Lucas spread maps across the dining table while Damien marked locations with red ink that looked too much like blood. Claire stood at the whiteboard they'd pulled from a closet, writing names and connections in handwriting that got messier as exhaustion set in. Victor's reinforcements are coming from New York, Lucas said. He tapped a map of Chicago's south side. Which means they'll use one of 3 entry points. Airport's too visible. That leaves the rail yards or the interstate corridor through Gary. Patricia will coordinate their arrival, Damien added. His voice had gone cold again. Professional. Like the past 12 hours had stripped away everything except the part of him that survived by being smarter and more ruthless than his enemies. She's the one with legitimate business connections, the one who can move people through the city without raising flags. Then we hit her first. Claire turned from the whiteboard. Cut off Victor's coordination before his people arrive. Patricia's smart. Lucas leaned back in his chair. She'll have protection, probably staying somewhere Victor controls. So we find out where. How? Claire pulled out her phone. She thinks I'm on her side, which means she'll tell me. She typed a message to Patricia asking for Victor's meeting location and hit send before second-guessing herself. The response came back 90 seconds later. Warehouse on Archer Avenue, South Side. Come alone. 10 p.m. Claire showed the message to Damien and Lucas. That's a trap, Lucas said immediately. Obviously. Claire pocketed her phone. But it's also the only way to get Patricia and Victor in the same room. They'll kill you the moment you walk through the door. Not if I give them something they want more. Damien's eyes sharpened. What are you thinking? Claire took a breath. I'm thinking Patricia told Victor I'm willing to betray you, which means Victor wants to meet the woman who broke Damien Calloway's judgment, the woman who made him weak. You're not weak, Damien said. I know that, but Victor doesn't. He thinks I'm leverage, a vulnerability he can exploit. Claire moved closer to the table. So we let him think that. Let him believe I'm the key to destroying you. And when he's focused on me, we hit him from behind. Lucas nodded slowly. Use you as bait while we position our people around the warehouse. Exactly. Damien stared at her with an expression that suggested he was imagining every way this could go wrong. You walk into that warehouse alone, you might not walk out. I won't be alone. Not really. Claire gestured at the map. You'll have snipers positioned here and here. Lucas coordinates the perimeter team. And you... She looked at Damien directly. You stay hidden until Victor reveals himself. I don't hide. You do if we want to catch him off guard. Claire's voice stayed firm. Victor thinks you're compromised, emotional, making mistakes. Let him keep thinking that until it's too late to matter. Damien and Lucas exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation without words. Finally, Lucas spoke. It could work. It has to work. Claire turned back to the whiteboard. Because in 60 hours, Victor's reinforcements arrive, and this gets infinitely worse. They spent the next 8 hours preparing for a confrontation that would either save Damien's empire or destroy it completely. Lucas called in every person whose loyalty he could verify. Not many. Patricia's betrayal had made trust feel like currency nobody could afford, but 12 men showed up at the safe house carrying weapons and grudges that ran deep enough to risk their lives. Damien reviewed the warehouse layout using satellite imagery that probably violated several laws. 3 entrances. High windows. Clear sightlines from neighboring buildings. Not ideal, but workable if they positioned people correctly. Claire cleaned her weapon for the 3rd time and tried not to think about all the ways walking into Victor's trap could end with her body in a river. Around noon, Lucas pulled her aside in the kitchen while Damien coordinated sniper positions in the other room. You don't have to do this, Lucas said quietly. Claire looked up from the coffee she was pretending to drink. Yes, I do. No, you really don't. We could find another way. There is no other way, not one that doesn't involve more people dying. Claire set down the mug. Patricia thinks I'm on her side. That's our advantage. We lose that the moment we hesitate. Lucas studied her carefully. He'll never forgive himself if something happens to you. Then make sure nothing happens to me. I'm serious, Claire. Damien's different now. Since you quit. Since last night. Since all of this. Lucas gestured vaguely at the chaos surrounding them. You matter to him in ways that compromise his judgment. I know. Do you? Because the Damien I worked with for 8 years wouldn't have fired me for making a mistake. He wouldn't have threatened to kill me. He would have been cold and rational and completely focused on protecting the organization. Lucas's voice dropped lower. But you changed that. You made him human. And humans make emotional decisions that get people killed. Claire met his stare without flinching. You think I should walk away? I think you're the only leverage Victor has. Remove yourself from the equation, and Damien goes back to being the most dangerous man in Chicago instead of someone whose weakness everyone can see. I'm not leaving him. Even if staying gets him killed? The question hung between them like an accusation Claire couldn't deny. Before she could answer, Damien appeared in the doorway. His eyes moved between them with the kind of awareness that suggested he'd heard at least part of the conversation. Problem? Damien asked. No, Lucas said quickly. Just strategizing. Damien didn't believe him, but let it slide. We're ready. Snipers move into position at 8, perimeter team at 9, Claire goes in at 10. And you? Claire asked. I'll be close. Damien's jaw tightened. Closer than Victor expects. Night fell over Chicago like a curtain dropping on the final act of something nobody could stop. Claire dressed in black tactical clothing that allowed concealed carry and free movement, strapped her weapon to her thigh where it wouldn't show under a jacket, checked her backup magazines twice and her earpiece 3 times. Damien watched her prepare with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. "You can still back out," he said. Claire secured her last magazine. "So can you." "I'm serious." "So am I." She turned to face him fully. "We're past the point of backing out. Have been since the moment Patricia confessed her plan. She confessed because you made her think you'd betray me." "I know. Which means Victor will test you, push you to prove your loyalty to him instead of me." Damien moved closer, close enough that Claire could see exhaustion and fear battling behind his carefully controlled expression. "And I need you to know that whatever you have to say in that warehouse, I'll understand." Claire frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the possibility that Victor forces you to choose." Damien's hands came up to frame her face. "And if staying alive means denouncing me, betraying everything we are to each other, I need you to do it." "Damien, I'm serious, Claire. If it's a choice between your life and my pride, choose your life every time, no hesitation." Claire grabbed his wrists. "I'm not going to betray you. You might have to. Then I'll die first." "Don't say that." His voice cracked. "Don't ever say that." "Why not? You were willing to surrender yourself to Victor to save the organization. Why is my life worth more than yours?" "Because you're the only reason I want to survive this." The confession came out raw, honest. Nothing like the controlled crime lord who negotiated with killers for a living. "Without you, the Empire doesn't mean anything. The power doesn't mean anything. None of it matters if you're not here." Claire pulled his hands away from her face and held them between both of hers. "Then trust that I'm good enough to walk into that warehouse and walk back out alive. Trust that Lucas positioned our people correctly. Trust that we're smarter than Victor and Patricia combined." "I do trust that. But I also know that trust doesn't stop bullets. And if something goes wrong..." He stopped, breathed, tried again. "If something goes wrong, I need you to know that meeting you was the best mistake I ever made." Claire kissed him before the moment could break apart under the weight of things neither of them could control. She kissed him like they had all the time in the world instead of 90 minutes before she walked into a trap that might kill them both. When they finally pulled apart, Lucas was standing in the doorway looking uncomfortable. "It's time," Lucas said. The warehouse on Archer Avenue looked exactly like every other abandoned industrial building on Chicago's South Side. Broken windows, rusted metal siding, weeds growing through cracked concrete. The kind of place where bodies turned up and nobody asked questions. Claire parked 2 blocks away and walked the remaining distance while her earpiece crackled with periodic check-ins from Lucas's perimeter team. "Sniper 1 in position. Sniper 2 in position. Perimeter secured." Claire's heartbeat stayed steady. Training took over where fear wanted to. She approached the warehouse's main entrance where a single door stood propped open with a cinder block. No guards visible. No obvious security. Which meant the security was either professional enough to stay hidden, or this was exactly the trap Lucas had predicted. Probably both. Claire stepped through the door into darkness that smelled like rust and old oil. Her eyes adjusted slowly. Shapes emerged from shadows. Machinery, crates, empty pallets stacked against walls. And at the far end of the warehouse, light spilled from an office with windows overlooking the floor below. Movement inside. Silhouettes behind glass. Patricia's voice carried through the empty space. "She's here." Claire walked forward slowly. Her hand stayed loose near her concealed weapon. Not threatening, just ready. She climbed metal stairs that rang beneath her boots. Each step felt like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. At the top, she pushed open the office door. Patricia stood near a desk looking exactly like she had at the coffee shop. Composed, professional, confident. But this time, 3 armed men flanked her wearing expressions that suggested they got paid to hurt people. And sitting behind the desk with a glass of whiskey like he owned the entire city was Victor Sokolov. "Claire Whitmore." Victor's accent was thick. His smile was colder. "The woman who broke Damien Calloway." Claire let the door close behind her. "I didn't break him. I just made him care about something other than power." Same thing in our world. Maybe. Victor gestured to an empty chair. Sit, please. Claire remained standing. I'm fine here. Suit yourself. Victor sipped his whiskey. Patricia tells me you wish to join our organization, that you recognize Damien's time is finished. I recognize that survival means choosing the winning side. And you believe I will win? I believe Damien is compromised, emotional, making decisions based on feelings instead of strategy. Claire kept her voice steady. Which means yes, you'll win. Victor studied her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. You were his bodyguard for 14 months. You protected him, stood beside him, and now you stand here offering to betray him? I stood beside him when he was worth protecting. That changed. When? When he fired his most loyal man for a mistake that wasn't even Lucas's fault. When he started making threats he couldn't back up. When he stopped being the coldest man in Chicago and started being someone who could be manipulated through emotion. Through you. Through me. Claire met Victor's stare directly. Which makes me either his biggest weakness or your biggest asset. Depends on how you use me. Silence filled the office. Patricia watched with an expression that suggested she was enjoying this far too much. The armed men stayed motionless. Victor swirled his whiskey slowly. You know what I think? Victor finally said. What? I think you're lying. Claire's pulse spiked, but her expression remained neutral. Why would I lie? Because Damien Calloway doesn't fall in love with women who betray him easily. He falls in love with women who are loyal to a fault. Victor set down his glass. And loyalty doesn't disappear in 3 weeks. You're wrong. Am I? Victor stood up, walked around the desk, moved closer to Claire with the kind of casual confidence that came from having armed men ready to kill on command. Then prove it. How? Victor pulled out a phone, dialed a number, hit speaker. The line rang twice before Damien's voice came through. Who is this? This is Victor Sokolov. I believe you're looking for someone. Silence. Then, where is she? She's standing right here. Safe. Unharmed. Victor's eyes never left Claire's face. And she has something to tell you. He held out the phone toward Claire. This was the test. The moment Patricia had probably been planning since their coffee shop meeting. The choice that would prove whether Claire was genuinely willing to betray Damien or just playing a game she couldn't win. Claire took the phone. Damien's breathing was audible through the speaker, controlled but fast, like he was running or preparing to. Claire? His voice carried weight that couldn't hide behind professionalism. I'm okay, she said. Are you alone? No. Victor's here. Patricia. 3 guards. I'm coming. Don't. Claire cut him off. Stay where you are. Claire, I mean it, Damien. Don't come. Silence stretched long enough that Victor's smile grew wider. Then Claire said the thing she'd been planning since the moment she walked through the warehouse door. I'm done protecting someone who can't protect himself. I'm done watching you make mistakes because you care more about me than your empire. And I'm done pretending we have a future when we both know this life doesn't allow for love. Damien's breathing stopped completely. So you're going to hear this once and only once. Claire's voice stayed steady, even though her hands were shaking. Walk away. Let Victor have Chicago. Disappear before his reinforcements arrive and finish what last night started. Because I won't be there to protect you anymore. Claire, I'm staying with Victor. He's offering me more than you ever could. Safety, power, a future that doesn't involve watching the man I love get killed because he's too emotionally compromised to see his enemies coming. She could hear Damien breaking through the phone, could hear the exact moment her words landed like bullets he couldn't dodge. You don't mean that, he finally said. I do. Claire. Goodbye, Damien. She ended the call and handed the phone back to Victor. Patricia was smiling like she'd just won something irreplaceable. The guards looked less tense, and Victor studied Claire with an expression that suggested he was reconsidering everything. That was convincing, Victor said. It was honest. Was it? He moved closer. Close enough that Claire could smell expensive cologne and see the scars on his knuckles from decades of violence. Because if you're lying, you just made a very permanent enemy. I'm not lying. Then you won't mind proving it one more time. Before Claire could ask what he meant, Victor nodded at one of his guards. The man moved to a metal cabinet against the wall. pulled out a laptop, set it on the desk, and opened it to reveal security camera footage of the warehouse perimeter, where Lucas's team was positioned exactly where they thought nobody could see them. Claire's blood turned to ice. "You see," Victor said calmly, "I've been in this business longer than Damien has been alive, and I know when someone is trying to set a trap." He gestured at the screen showing multiple angles of men crouched behind cover with weapons ready. "Your people have been in position for 40 minutes, which means this," he gestured between himself and Claire, "was never about you joining me. It was about getting me in one place long enough for Damien to attack." Patricia's smile vanished. "You said she was genuine." "I said she was convincing." Victor turned back to Claire. "But convincing doesn't mean honest." Claire's mind raced through options that were rapidly disappearing. The element of surprise was gone. Victor knew about the perimeter team, which meant he probably had countermeasures already in place. "So here's what happens now," Victor continued. His voice stayed conversational, almost friendly. "You're going to call Damien back, tell him to pull his people, and then you're going to watch while I demonstrate what happens to men who think emotion makes them powerful instead of weak." "And if I refuse?" Victor nodded at a different guard. The man pulled out his own phone, tapped the screen, held it up so Claire could see. Live footage. Damien crouched behind a dumpster approximately 30 yards from the warehouse entrance, completely unaware he was being watched. "I have 8 snipers positioned around this building," Victor said, "all of them with clear shots at Damien Calloway, all of them waiting for my order." Claire's hands curled into fists. "You'll start a war." "No, I'll finish one." Victor pulled his own weapon from a shoulder holster, not threatening, just showing he was armed. "So, you can call him, tell him to retreat, save his life and spend the rest of yours knowing you chose survival over love, or you can refuse, and I'll kill him while you watch. Your choice." The office went silent except for Claire's heartbeat pounding in her ears. This was the scenario Damien had warned her about, the choice between his life and her loyalty. The moment where everything came down to impossible decisions with fatal consequences. Through the window, she could see the warehouse floor below, empty except for shadows and machines that had stopped working years ago. Her earpiece was still active, which meant Lucas was hearing all of this, which meant he knew the perimeter was compromised and Damien was in a sniper's crosshairs. Claire made a decision. "Okay," she said. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I'll call him." Claire held out her hand for a phone. "But you pull your snipers first. I'm not giving you everything while you give me nothing. You're not in a position to negotiate. Neither are you. Kill Damien and his entire organization comes down on you with everything they have. You might win eventually, but you'll lose people, resources, time." Claire kept her voice level. "Or you can let him walk away. Save your strength for taking over the city without a war that costs more than it's worth." Victor considered this. Patricia looked furious. "You said we'd kill him tonight." "I said we'd eliminate the threat." Victor's eyes never left Claire. "But perhaps there's more than one way to do that." He pulled out his phone, made a call, spoke in Russian too fast for Claire to follow. Then he nodded. "My snipers are pulling back. Now call Damien." Claire took the phone Victor offered, dialed Damien's number. It rang once before he answered. "Claire, get out." She spoke fast. No time for explanations. "Perimeter's compromised. Victor knows everything. You have approximately 2 minutes before this goes bad." "I'm not leaving without you." "Yes, you are. Lucas." She knew he was listening. "Pull everyone. Now. Full retreat." Through the window, she saw movement. Men emerging from positions they'd held for an hour, running, disappearing into darkness. And somewhere in that chaos, Damien was making the same choice she'd forced on him. Survival over pride. Life over empire. Her over everything else. "I'm coming back for you," Damien said through the phone. His voice was raw, broken. "I swear to God, Claire, I'm coming back." "I know." She ended the call before he could say anything else that would make this harder than it already was. Victor took the phone back, checked his own security footage, watched Damien's people retreat into the night. "Smart," Victor said, "but temporary." Claire said nothing. Patricia moved closer to Victor. "What now?" "Now we wait for my reinforcements to arrive. And then we finish what we started. Victor gestured at his guards. Take her downstairs. Make sure she's comfortable. She's going to be our guest until Damien learns that love is the most expensive weakness a man can have. Two guards grabbed Claire's arms. She didn't resist, didn't fight, because fighting would get her killed and dead people couldn't escape. They dragged her down the metal stairs, across the warehouse floor, into a small room that might have been an office once, but was now just a concrete box with a single chair and a door that locked from outside. The guard shoved her inside, slammed the door. The lock clicked. Claire sat in darkness and listened to her own breathing while her mind ran through scenarios that all ended badly. Damien was alive. Lucas had pulled the team. Victor didn't have his immediate victory, but she was captured. And in 60 hours, Victor's reinforcements would arrive, and this would start all over again. Except next time, Damien wouldn't have surprise on his side. Next time, he'd be coming for her knowing it was a trap. And love made people do stupid things. Claire closed her eyes and tried not to think about all the ways this story could end. Claire sat in darkness for 3 hours before the door opened again. Not Victor. Not Patricia. One of the guards carrying a bottle of water and a protein bar that looked like it had been sitting in someone's glove compartment for 6 months. He set both on the floor without speaking and left. The lock clicked back into place. Claire didn't touch either item. She stayed in the chair with her hands loose in her lap and her mind working through calculations that refused to add up correctly. Damien knew where she was. Lucas knew the layout. They had pulled back, but that didn't mean retreat. It meant regrouping. The question wasn't whether Damien would come for her. The question was how long before Victor realized that too and moved her somewhere impossible to find. She tested the door handle. Locked solid. Checked the walls for weaknesses. Concrete. No windows. No ventilation beyond a single grate too small to fit through even if she could reach it. Professional containment. The kind designed to hold people who knew how to escape. Claire sat back down and waited. 4 hours later, the warehouse erupted into chaos. Gunfire shattered the silence, shouting in Russian and English, running footsteps on concrete, the sound of breaking glass and something heavy hitting metal. Claire stood immediately, pressed her ear against the door. More gunfire. Closer now. Someone screaming. Then silence that felt worse than noise. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Lucas stood in the doorway holding a weapon that had definitely been fired recently. Blood streaked his face from a cut above his eye. His expression was grim. "We need to move," he said. "Now." Claire didn't ask questions. She followed him out into the warehouse where chaos had transformed familiar space into something unrecognizable. Bodies on the floor. 2 of Victor's guards. One of Damien's men she recognized from the safe house. Lucas moved fast through the wreckage. Claire stayed close. Her eyes scanned automatically for threats even without a weapon. They reached the main entrance where more of Damien's people had secured a perimeter, maybe 8 men total, less than they'd had before, which meant casualties she couldn't think about yet. "Where's Damien?" Claire asked. Lucas gestured toward the office. "Upstairs. With Victor." Claire's blood ran cold. "Alone?" "Not exactly." Lucas handed her a weapon from somewhere beneath his jacket. "But close enough that you should probably get up there." Claire took the gun and checked the magazine by muscle memory. Then she ran toward the metal stairs without waiting for permission. She took the steps 2 at a time. Her boots rang against metal. At the top, the office door stood open. Light spilled out. Voices carried through. Claire moved to the doorway and stopped. Damien stood in the center of the room holding Victor at gunpoint. Blood dripped from Damien's left arm. His suit was torn. His face was bruised, but his hand stayed perfectly steady. Victor sat in the chair behind his desk. No weapon visible. No guards left. Just a man who had miscalculated badly and was now facing consequences he couldn't negotiate away. Patricia lay on the floor near the filing cabinet, unconscious or dead. Claire couldn't tell which from the doorway. "Claire." Damien's eyes flicked toward her briefly before returning to Victor. "You okay?" "I'm fine." She stepped into the office with her weapon raised. "What happened?" "We came back." Damien's voice was flat, empty. The tone he used when violence had become inevitable and talking was pointless. Victor thought we'd wait for his reinforcements. He was wrong. Victor's expression remained carefully neutral despite the gun pointed at his chest. "Killing me starts a war you cannot win. I don't need to win. I just need you dead. Damien's finger moved to the trigger. For thinking you could take her. For thinking I was weak enough to let you. Damien, Claire moved closer. Don't. Why not? Because killing him makes you the same as him, and you're not. She positioned herself where Damien could see her without taking his eyes off Victor. You're better. You've always been better. That's why people follow you instead of men like him. He tried to destroy everything I built. He failed. He hurt you. I'm standing here, alive, unharmed. Claire's voice stayed calm. Because you came back. Because Lucas coordinated the assault. Because your people are loyal enough to risk their lives even when logic says they should run. Damien's jaw tightened. He doesn't deserve mercy. I'm not asking you to show mercy. I'm asking you to be smart. Claire took another step closer. Kill him, and his organization comes for you tomorrow. Let him live, and you send a message that's worth more than his corpse. What message? That you're powerful enough to spare enemies who underestimate you. Silence filled the office while Damien considered this. Victor watched them both with an expression that suggested he was recalculating everything he thought he knew about Damien Calloway. I should kill you anyway, Damien finally said to Victor, just for making her believe she had to betray me to save my life. I didn't betray you, Claire said quietly. Damien's eyes shifted to her. You told me to walk away, to let Victor have Chicago. I told you what he needed to hear to keep his snipers from shooting you. Claire held his gaze. But I never meant it, not for a second. Something broke across Damien's expression. Relief, pain, gratitude, all of it crashing together. He lowered his weapon, not completely, just enough to make clear he wasn't going to shoot Victor in the next 5 seconds. Get out of Chicago, Damien said to Victor. Take whatever's left of your organization and disappear. Because if I see you again, mercy isn't part of the conversation. Victor stood slowly. His hands stayed visible, unthreatening. And my reinforcements? We'll find a city that doesn't want them. Damien gestured toward the door with his weapon. You've got 12 hours. After that, anyone connected to you becomes a target. Victor moved toward the exit, paused near Claire. You're braver than I gave you credit for. And you're not as smart as you thought you were. Claire's voice stayed cold. Now walk away before Damien changes his mind. Victor left without another word. His footsteps echoed down the metal stairs, across the warehouse floor. Then silence rushed back in. Claire lowered her weapon. Damien did the same. They stood in an office that smelled like blood and gunpowder and bad decisions while Chicago continued existing 40 feet below. Patricia? Claire asked. Unconscious. Lucas hit her harder than necessary. Damien moved toward Claire slowly, like approaching something that might disappear if he moved too fast. She'll wake up in police custody, federal charges, enough evidence to keep her locked up for decades. And Marcus Webb, already arrested, turns out the FBI's been building a RICO case against him for 2 years. We just gave them the final pieces. Claire nodded. Her adrenaline was crashing, exhaustion hit like a physical force. What about Lucas? What about him? You fired him, threatened to kill him. I was wrong. Damien stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see every bruise, every cut, every mark left by a fight that had nearly cost them everything. About a lot of things, but mostly about thinking I could control this life without letting anyone close enough to matter. And now? Now I know better. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle, despite the violence still echoing in the warehouse below. You saved my life tonight, not by protecting me from bullets, by reminding me what I was fighting for when logic said I should run. Claire leaned into his touch. I meant what I said on the phone. The part about not protecting you anymore. I know. Because I can't be your bodyguard, and you're... She paused, searching for a word that fit what they'd become to each other. Whatever we are. So what do? We figure out how to be partners instead of protector and protected. Claire's hands covered his. We build something that doesn't require me to stand between you and danger. And we stop pretending that loving each other makes us weak. Damien's eyes searched her face like memorizing something he'd almost lost. What if I don't know how to do that? Then we learn together. He kissed her. Not desperate like before. Not urgent. Just steady and certain and real. When they finally pulled apart, Lucas appeared in the doorway looking exhausted. Police are asking questions we can't answer much longer, Lucas said. We need to clear out. Damien nodded once. Then he turned back to Claire with an expression that looked almost vulnerable. Come with me? Where? Anywhere that isn't a crime scene. Claire almost smiled. Yeah, okay. They left the warehouse together while emergency lights painted the night red and blue. Police secured the perimeter. Paramedics treated injuries. Reporters would arrive eventually, asking questions nobody planned to answer honestly. Lucas coordinated the cleanup with efficiency that suggested he'd done this before, making sure stories aligned. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses remembered the version of events that kept everyone out of federal prison. Damien and Claire slipped away before official statements became mandatory. They climbed into a car Lucas had positioned 2 blocks away and drove through Chicago while dawn started breaking over the skyline. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes, just breathed, existed. Let the weight of surviving slowly settle into something manageable. Finally, Claire broke the silence. Where are we going? Somewhere quiet. Damien kept his eyes on the road. Somewhere far away from warehouses and ambushes and people who think power means never showing weakness. That's not an answer. No, it's not. He glanced at her briefly. Because I don't have an answer yet. I just know I can't keep living the way I was before you. Before me, you ruled Chicago. Before you, I survived Chicago. There's a difference. Damien's hands tightened on the steering wheel. And I'm tired of just surviving. They drove north through neighborhoods that shifted from industrial to residential to something approaching suburban. The city gave way to smaller towns. Eventually, Damien pulled into a parking lot overlooking Lake Michigan, where water stretched toward the horizon like it had no end. He killed the engine. They sat in sudden silence, broken only by waves hitting rocks below. I need to tell you something, Damien said. Claire turned toward him. Okay. When Victor's guard showed me that footage of you in the office, when I heard you tell me to walk away, he stopped, breathed, tried again. I realized that loving you was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done. More terrifying than building an empire. More terrifying than facing enemies who wanted me dead. Because for the first time in my life, I had something to lose that actually mattered. I know the feeling. No, you don't. Not completely. Damien turned to face her fully. Because you've always been brave enough to care about people even when it puts you at risk. But I spent 34 years believing that caring was weakness. That emotion was liability. That the only way to survive was to make sure nothing mattered more than control. What changed? You did. His voice cracked slightly. You walked into my office 14 months ago and slowly, without me even realizing it, you became the thing that mattered more than survival, more than power, more than anything I'd ever built. Claire reached for his hand. That scares you. It terrifies me. Because I don't know how to protect what matters when what matters is a person instead of an empire. Then stop trying to protect me and start trusting that I can protect myself. Damien stared at their joined hands. I fired Lucas because he made a mistake that almost got me killed. But the real reason was because he was right. I am compromised. I do make decisions based on keeping you safe instead of what's best for the organization. So fire me too. He looked up sharply. What? Fire me from the part where I'm your responsibility, where my safety is your burden. Claire squeezed his hand. Because as long as you see me as something you need to protect, we're never going to be equals. And I didn't quit being your bodyguard just to become your liability. You're not a liability. Then prove it. Let me stand beside you instead of behind you. Let me make my own choices even when they put me at risk. Let me be your partner instead of your weakness. Damien was quiet for a long time. The sun continued rising. The lake continued existing. And somewhere in Chicago, Lucas was cleaning up a mess that would take days to fully resolve. I don't know if I can do that, Damien finally admitted. Then we'll figure it out together. One day at a time, one choice at a time. Claire shifted closer. Because I'm not walking away. Not after everything we survived to get here. Even though being with me means living in a world where last night happens, even though... She touched his face where a bruise was already darkening. Because the alternative is living without you, and that feels worse than any ambush Victor could plan. Damien pulled her into his arms. They sat in a car overlooking Lake Michigan while the world slowly woke up and kept spinning like nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. Bots. 3 months later, Claire opened her own security consulting firm in a downtown office that looked legitimate because it was. Corporate clients, executive protection, risk assessment, nothing involving organized crime or warehouses where people got shot. Damien attended the opening reception wearing a suit that probably cost more than her first month's rent. He shook hands with potential clients, made polite conversation, acted like a successful businessman supporting his partner's new venture instead of the crime lord he'd been 3 months earlier. Lucas was there too. Reinstated as Damien's second-in-command after a conversation Claire hadn't been present for but suspected involved apologies neither man wanted to make. "This is strange," Lucas said quietly. He stood near the refreshment table holding champagne he wasn't drinking. Seeing him like this, Claire followed his gaze to where Damien was laughing at something a corporate security director had said. Like what? Human, relaxed, like someone who sleeps at night instead of planning how to survive until morning. He's still planning, just different things. Because of you. Because of both of us. Claire accepted a champagne flute from a passing server. He decided to change. I just made it easier. Lucas studied her carefully. You know, people are talking about how Damien Calloway walked away from half his empire to go legitimate. About how the coldest man in Chicago suddenly cares about building something legal instead of powerful. Let them talk. They're saying you changed him. They're right. Claire sipped her champagne. But he changed me too. Made me realize that surviving doesn't mean staying detached. That caring about people is strength instead of weakness. And you're okay with that? Giving up the adrenaline? Claire looked around the office she'd built. The legitimate business. The clients who didn't carry weapons or run criminal empires. The life that looked normal from outside. I'm okay with choosing survival over death, she said, and peace over constantly preparing for war. Lucas nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think you're good for him, even if it took me a while to see it. Thanks. Don't thank me yet, because if this goes sideways, I'm the one who'll say I told you so. Claire almost smiled. Fair enough. The reception continued for another 2 hours. Business cards exchanged, contacts made, foundation built for something that might actually last longer than the next crisis. When the last guest finally left, Claire found Damien alone in her new office, staring out the window at Chicago's skyline. You okay? She asked. I was just thinking about the first time we met. How you walked into my office looking like you could kill someone with your bare hands if necessary. I still can. I know. He turned away from the window. But now you do it protecting corporate executives instead of crime lords. Is that a problem? No, it's different. Good different. Damien moved closer. I'm proud of you. For building this. For proving that leaving my world doesn't mean losing yourself. I didn't leave your world. I just expanded mine. Claire leaned against her desk. And you're expanding yours. Going legitimate. Building businesses that don't require violence to maintain. Most of them, anyway. Damien, I'm kidding. He pulled her closer. Mostly. Claire wrapped her arms around him. We're going to be okay. You know that, right? I'm starting to believe it. Good, because I didn't survive Patricia and Victor and your jealousy issues just to watch you self-destruct from doubt. Damien laughed quietly. The sound was warm. Real. Nothing like the cold control he'd worn like armor for most of his adult life. My jealousy issues? He repeated. You threatened to destroy Marcus Webb's entire real estate empire because he touched my arm. He touched you inappropriately. He flirted. There's a difference. Not to me. Damien's hand settled on her waist. I'm still working on the part where other men exist near you, and I don't immediately consider homicide. Keep working on it. I will. Promise. He kissed her forehead. But I'm not promising to like it. 6 months after the warehouse, Damien proposed during a quiet dinner at home instead of somewhere public and dramatic. No ring yet. No elaborate plan. Just the two of them eating takeout on his penthouse balcony while Chicago glowed below. Marry me, he said suddenly. Claire nearly choked on her noodles. What? Marry me. Make it official. Stop letting people introduce you as my girlfriend when you're so much more than that. That's possibly the least romantic proposal in history. I can do better if you want romantic, skywriting, flash mob, whatever ridiculous gesture people expect. Damien set down his food. But I'd rather be honest. I want to marry you because every day without you feels incomplete. Because you make me want to be better than I was. Because loving you is the only thing I've ever done that feels more important than surviving. Claire stared at him while her brain tried to process the fact that Damien Calloway, the man who'd spent 14 months keeping her at arm's length, was proposing marriage over Chinese takeout. "You're serious," she said. "Completely. We've only been officially together for 8 months. I've known you for 22 months. I've loved you for at least 18 of them, even when I was too afraid to admit it. Damien, you don't have to answer now. Think about it. Take your time." He reached across the small table and took her hand. "But know that whether you say yes today, or a year from now, or never, I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me." Claire looked at their joined hands, thought about everything they'd survived to reach this moment. The jealousy, the ambush, the betrayals, the warehouse where she'd thought she might die without ever telling him how much he mattered. She thought about 14 months of professional distance that felt like torture, about the moment he threatened Marcus Webb for touching her, about his hands shaking when he realized she was alive after the warehouse. She thought about choosing survival over death, peace over war, love over control. "Yes," she said. Damien blinked. "Yes? Yes. I'll marry you. Not because it's logical or because we've been together long enough, but because I'm tired of pretending the scariest thing I ever did wasn't falling in love with someone who built an empire on never showing weakness." Relief crashed across his expression. He stood, pulled her up with him, kissed her like she'd just given him something infinitely more valuable than power or money or control over an entire city. When they finally broke apart, Claire was laughing. "What?" Damien asked. "I just realized I'm going to marry a crime lord who went legitimate because he got jealous. Former crime lord. Still counts." "Probably." He pulled her closer. "But I'd rather be a former crime lord married to you than the most powerful man in Chicago without you." "That's almost romantic." "I'm working on it." Matak. 1 year later, they got married in a small ceremony that involved more security than guests. Lucas stood as Damien's best man, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo. Claire's former military colleagues attended wearing expressions that suggested they still couldn't believe she'd fallen for someone from this world. The ceremony was short. The vows were honest. And when Damien kissed his wife for the first time, he looked like someone who'd finally figured out that strength came from letting people close instead of keeping them at distance. The reception happened at Damien's penthouse. No elaborate venue, no hundreds of guests. Just the people who mattered celebrating something that had nearly been destroyed before it began. Late in the evening, Claire found herself alone on the balcony where Damien had proposed a year earlier. The city stretched below in patterns of light that looked almost beautiful when you weren't running from bullets. Damien joined her moments later, loosened tie, jacket abandoned somewhere inside. He looked relaxed in ways that still surprised her. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm married to a man who used to terrify everyone in Chicago, so yeah, I'm great." "Used to. Still does occasionally. But now you do it through legitimate business intimidation instead of actual violence." Progress. Damien leaned against the railing beside her. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me when giving up was the logical choice. For walking into that warehouse knowing it was a trap. For reminding me that being powerful matters less than being human." Claire turned toward him. "You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe. But it would have taken longer, cost more, hurt more people." He reached for her hand. "You made me better. And I know that sounds like something from a greeting card, but it's true. You made me better too. Made me believe that caring about people doesn't make you weak. That love is worth risking everything for, even when logic says you should run." They stood together while the city continued existing below. While their guests celebrated inside. While time moved forward, carrying them toward whatever came next. "What do you think happens now?" Claire asked. "Now we live." Damien pulled her into his arms. "We build businesses, make choices, figure out how to be married when neither of us has any idea what normal looks like." "Sounds terrifying." "Sounds perfect." Claire laughed against his chest. "You've changed. So have you. Yeah, I have. They stayed on the balcony until someone called them back inside for cake or champagne or one of the thousand small rituals that marked moments like this as significant. And when they finally returned to the celebration, Claire realized something that felt important. For 14 months, she had protected Damien Calloway from external threats, from bullets and betrayals and enemies who wanted him dead. But the real protection had come from something simpler, from choosing each other every day even when it was hard, from trusting that love was strength instead of weakness, from believing that survival meant more than just staying alive, it meant building something worth living for. Chicago glowed below them. The city that had nearly destroyed them. The city they'd learned to navigate together. The city that would always be part of their story, even as they wrote new chapters elsewhere. Damien had been right about one thing. Falling in love had been the most terrifying decision either of them ever made. But it had also been the only decision that mattered when everything else fell apart. Years later, when people asked Claire Calloway about how she'd met her husband, she never told them the whole truth. Never mentioned the crime empire or the warehouses or the night jealousy saved both their lives. She just smiled and said something vague about protection detail and proximity, and slowly realizing that the most dangerous man she'd ever met was also the only one who made her feel completely safe. And that was enough. Because some stories were too complicated for strangers to understand, too raw, too real. But for the people who lived them, those stories were everything.